I make it a habit never to clap a speaker until after I've heard them speak, in case you don't agree with what they say. First of all, let me say a big thank you to the organisers for inviting me here, and I'm really grateful and I'm really proud to share a platform with my fellow friends and comrades. Let me start with this. I'm not going to try and discuss asylum in Britain, and I'm not going to try and attempt to deal with the issues that the platform have made, because they've made them so eloquently, and I couldn't do it as justice as they have. What I want to try and do is I want to try and look at these questions in a broader context, because it seems to me that there are two defining elements of Europe in the last 10 years, and that has been that we are in the most deep and profound economic crisis, and our rulers are trying to make the poor and working people pay for that crisis, coupled with an attempt by almost every mainstream political party. And it's not true about David Cameron supporting Unite Against Fascism, he certainly doesn't. It's true of all mainstream political parties that they are playing the race card, both in order to distract away from that economic crisis and to blame the most marginal and vulnerable people in society for the problems. And this is the politics of the gutter, and this has very, very deep and profound impact on society in general. And when I say that, I think there are two threads in which they are they're playing the race card. And this is the bit I want to look at. Over the last 2-3 years, Merkel, Sarkozy, David Cameron in Britain, the Spanish Prime Minister have all attacked multiculturalism, and in turn have played an anti-Muslim racism or Islamophobia, whichever term you prefer, have tried to blame Muslims in general for the problems that we see, as if they are the other or the people from outside. They are attacking the fabric that has created much of what Europe is today, whether they like it or not. You see, and this is incredibly dangerous, because what it does then is it enables academics, the media, to create and generalise from this and create much deeper waves of racism. So we see across Eastern Europe and Southern Europe attacks on the Roma, deportations, camps being destroyed. We see the anti-migration policies right across Europe, from sending people home who have no papers, through mass arrests, no trials, anything at all, no chance to prove themselves. We have camps in Britain where people are held without any trial, any chance of finding themselves innocent, and just held without any support. We see the attacks on asylum. 20 years ago, no European country would have dreamed of attacking asylum seekers. It was something you were proud of, that your country would welcome the most disadvantaged, those fleeing war and famine. It was something you would hold up and say, yes, in Britain, yes, in France, yes, in Norway, we're proud to welcome refugees facing terror, torture, and the rest of it. Now, it's seen as some kind of dirty word that somehow we should be ashamed of welcoming people to this country. I say never. We should always welcome those people who face persecution, whether it's political, social, economic. And I don't distinguish between those. I don't distinguish between those fleeing political persecution and those fleeing economic persecution. It's human beings' right to find work. It's human beings' right to have political freedom. And if they can't, they have the right to find it elsewhere in other countries. It's a God-given right. It's a human right, if you want to put it that way. So we are seeing a generalised assault by our leaders, by the media, and by other political establishments. And that is my second point. That's my second point, which is this. That once you set the touch paper off of racism from the top, don't be surprised then that it feeds its way down into society, and much nastier political forces seize it and say we are the legitimate expression of racism, of these anti-migrant, anti-asylum policies. That's why across Europe right now we have to wake up. There is a real danger and a real threat. We see Golden Dawn in Greece now. with something like 18 MPs in Parliament. I spoke in Greece 3 weeks ago where gangs of Golden Dawn members ran through the streets attacking migrants in the streets without any recourse. The police stood in the street and watched them do nothing. I was in Russia this time last Christmas. I was in 2 years ago, in Moscow, where gangs of football hooligans met at the station, 8,000 of them. They ran through the streets of Moscow with swords and knives. They stabbed 74 people and killed 3 migrants. In the British press, it received just 3 paragraphs in one newspaper. Virulent racists storming the streets. You see in France, the Front National, 13.6% of the vote. You see the Swedish Democrats go through the electoral threshold and now have 20 MPs. We have in Britain the rise of the English Defence League, who charge through the streets attacking Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, black people and socialists and anti-racists. We are seeing this right across Europe. And I would argue this. I would argue it's taking 3 trends. Of course, these trends blur and they cross over, but there are 3 distinct forms that these racist parties and fascist parties are growing. The first are the populist right-wing electoral parties. People like Geert Wilders' PVV in Holland, UKIP in Britain, the fringe of the Tea Party in the Republican Party in America. These populist racist parties are using Islamophobia and other forms of racism to win electoral support and begin to win seats in the Parliament and the European Parliament. The second trend that's developing is a Euro-fascist strategy, first developed by Le Pen in France in the early 80s, which I think consists of 2 things. It consists of, 1, attempting to moderate their fascist ideology. Le Pen, in his biography, writes, it was time for the Front National to take off their pierre noir, the black feet, the black shoes. Ask any Algerian what the black shoes were. The black shoes were the paratroopers, the fascist paratroopers in Algeria who tortured and murdered Muslims and Algerian people in the war for independence. In other words, Le Pen was arguing to shed the imagery of the far-right fascist movement that France had developed and begin to develop an electoral strategy which removed race and talked much more about the issues of identity. No longer did you talk about racial superiority, you talked about the ideas of identity, culture, our culture being taken away, our identity being taken away from outsiders. This has been developed by the British National Party in Britain, the Swedish Democrats, I would argue, and other far-right parties. This is true. So on the surface, they try and look like they're more respectable. But underneath, it's vital we understand they retain their ideological fascist core. Le Pen is still a fascist. He always was a fascist. Nick Griffin, the leader of the British National Party, is a fascist. He walks like a duck. He swims like a duck. He quacks like a duck. It means he is a duck. And that's what we have to understand about these fascist movements. They can pretend they're something else, but they are what they are. And then there's the third formation, which I would talk about is things like Jobbik in Hungary, the English Defence League, and the other defence leagues that are forming across Eastern and Southern Europe, which are really a combination and are beginning to cross-fertilise between some form of electoral work, but also openly encouraging the kind of classic fascism of the 1930s of street gangs attacking people. I spoke in Hungary at a Love Music Hate Racism festival in Zizet in Budapest, when on the same time the fascists organised a carnival of 12,000 just 50 kilometres down the road. And then where that festival took place, they rampaged through a Roma village. Amnesty International reported that in the last 18 months, 29 Roma have been murdered by supporters or people influenced by the ideas of Jobbik. We're seeing terror on the streets of parts of Europe. And I want to say this as well. You see, because there's a street fighting movement and because we see the growth of parliamentary, fascist and far-right organisations, there are those that are connected but are disconnected. I'll name the names. Anders Breivik, David Copeland in Britain. For those who don't know, he was a man that set bombs off in London, in the Muslim community, inside the gay community and inside our black community in order to try and create a race war. He killed 3 people. Then you have Wade Michael Page in Wisconsin, the man who walked into a Sikh temple and murdered Sikhs. You see, the way the press portrayed them in England, and I don't know how they do it here in Norway, but they portray these people as lone wolves, as somehow separate, psychopathic nutters. They may well be mad. They may be the most vicious people we ever have in our societies, but they are political. They come from a political strategy. They all come from fascist organisations. And we have to understand it. And there's a strain of fascism, which is because it's so impatient for things to move forward, believes that what you have to try and do is detonate a race war. And that's what links Breivik with Copeland, with Wade, is a connection to the far right and fascist organisations of their country. But their impatience means they turn to individualistic terror in order to try and provoke a race war. We shouldn't just let them get away with the idea that they are just criminal lunatics. These people are fascist to the core, and they have to be exposed because they have links to, if you look at Copeland, David Copeland in Britain has links to the British National Party and then further back to the National Front. These people are always linked to far-right parties because they hate multicultural Europe, they hate migrant people, they hate asylum seekers, they are fascist, and we have to make sure we label them because this is the disease that is rotting inside Europe, and these are the extreme end of it. This is my last 2 points. My last 2 points. I'm a socialist. I make no apologies about it at all, in case you didn't work that one out for yourself. Let me just say this. There's a very famous quote that socialists always repeat, and it goes something like this. We have to be the tribunes of the oppressed. What that means to me is when it gets hard, when people are being victimised, marginalised, and people are being racially harassed, that is not the time to say, you know what, there's a slight problem with Islam. There is a slight problem with the Roma taking our jobs. There is a slight problem with this, that, or the other. When you're the tribune of the oppressed, what you have to do is when the going gets tough, you have to make a stand. You have to say, your enemy is my friend. I do not buy any of the ideas that Islam is more backward than Christianity. I do not buy the idea that somehow Islam is more aggressive towards women or gays than the Catholic Church in Britain. I don't buy it, I don't accept it, and once you begin to give an inch, the racists do not go away, they take a mile, they come back for more and more and more, and therefore you have to say no. You have to start, when any time a person makes a racist comment, you have to say no. When the establishment attacks migrants, you have to say no. When the establishment attacks asylum seekers, you have to say no. You have to say they are welcome in our countries. They are welcome in Europe, because if we are not their friends, then who is? And just as important, it's not a liberal concept. Because I believe if they get away with dividing black from white, Asian from Jew, white from black and Asian, if they get away with this, actually, they'll attack us even more. Because once you divide people, it's easier to carry out the attacks on austerity. Once you divide black from white, it's easier to turn around and build no more homes to home the homelessness. It's easy for people to cut people's wages and cut their services. So it's in all of our interests to stand together, united. And let me say this is the most important thing, because I belong to an organisation called Unite Against Fascism. And what we say is really simple. We have two very simple messages. One, you see, many of us in this hall will disagree with me. There will be Greens in here think maybe Martin's a bit extreme. There'll be anarchists in here thinking maybe he's not extreme enough. There'll be people who say I'm not really that political. You see, we must debate. We must debate our ways forward. I take that for granted. But you see, when fascism comes to your town or city or country, when the racists begin to get organised, at that point, the only thing you can do is come together and unite. Because if you don't, they will break us. You see, I see our movement like the fingers on my hand. You see, I don't know if you've ever been into a fight, but fighting with a finger is not very good. You kind of jab. Doesn't do much. You might poke someone's eye out, but that's about as far as you can get. The great advantage of our movement is we have to turn around and say, when these people come, we have to close together our fingers and create a fist. We may disagree on many things, but we will all agree that racism and fascism has no place in our towns and communities and our cities. And we come together and create a united movement. That's the starting point of UAF. It brings together trade unionists, anti-fascists, anti-racist, Greens, socialists, Labour Party people together, community activists together in a big organisation. Secondly, it says this, that we never stay at home when the fascists come to our towns. There are some people in Britain that say, when the EDL come, stay indoors. Don't give them the publicity. I say never. Never stay indoors. Because when you stay indoors and they take to the streets, they intimidate, they bully, they attack, they create violence. We can only stand together if we can show together that we are a united community against these people. That's the core philosophy of Unite Against Fascism. Unity and the ability to defend politically, both through demonstrations, mass propaganda, and big political ideas that we have an alternative. Because we don't offer an alternative, these people certainly are.